Sunrise over Lake Texcoco. The year is 1517. You stand on a stone terrace some 30 meters above the waterline. Cool air carries the scent of copal, aromatic resin burning in censers, and damp clay. Smoke drifts between the columns. Before you stretches a city Europe has never seen, Tenochtitlan. 200,000 inhabitants, more than contemporary London, Paris, and Seville combined. White causeways cut across the emerald lake like veins on a giant's palm. The water smells of fish and algae. At the ends of each causeway, neighborhoods pulse with life. Markets, temples, commerce. You hear the distant murmur of crowds at Tlatelolco Plaza, where morning trade has just begun. And rising above it all, the pyramids. The largest, Templo Mayor, stands 60 meters tall, roughly the height of a modern 20-story building. At its summit, two sanctuaries, one blue, one red, rain and war. Tlaloc, god of storms and fertility, and Huitzilopochtli, god of war and the sun. The sun breaks through the morning mist. Its first ray strikes the golden ornaments atop the temple. Priests on the platform raise their arms in greeting. Tonatiuh, the hungry god, a warrior who must battle his sister moon and 400 brother stars every morning just to rise above the horizon. To win that battle, he needs fuel. He needs chalchuat, precious water, human blood. In Aztec eyes, the sun is literally a machine that requires lubrication, and the lubricant runs red. You catch the aroma of fresh corn tortillas from a nearby house. The scent of maize mingles with copal smoke. A woman in a white tunic carries a clay water jug, her bare feet slapping against stone. Children run past, laughing and shoving. An ordinary morning, an ordinary city, ordinary people. Except these ordinary people built one of the most sophisticated systems of ritual violence in history. Not from sadism, not from barbarism, from logic, from desperation, from cosmic terror at the end of the world, which could arrive any moment if the sun failed to receive its portion. Before the Aztecs could build an empire, they first had to understand one fundamental truth about the universe. The world is not eternal. The world is fragile. The world has already ended 4 times. The myth of the 5 suns is not some poetic campfire tale. It is Aztec physics, their theory of everything. It begins with catastrophe. The first sun bore the name Nahui Ocelotl, 4 jaguar. It was ruled by Tezcatlipoca, god of night and destiny, whose name means smoking mirror. For nearly 700 years, giants inhabited the earth, feeding on acorns. Then Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wind and civilization, struck Tezcatlipoca with a stone club and cast him from the sky. Tezcatlipoca fell into the ocean, emerged as a gigantic jaguar, and devoured all the giants. The sky collapsed onto the earth. End of the first world. The second sun was called Nahui Ehecatl, 4 wind. Quetzalcoatl took command. People ate pine nuts. Another 7 centuries of peace. Tezcatlipoca kicked Quetzalcoatl from his throne. The feathered serpent flew into a rage and sent hurricanes so powerful they literally blew everything away. The survivors transformed into monkeys. End of the second world. The third sun bore the name Nahui Quiahuitl, 4 rain. It was ruled by Tlaloc, god of storms and fertility. People fed on wild teosinte, the ancestor of maize. From the sky fell rain of volcanic fire. Not water. Fire. Lava and burning stones falling from above for days on end. The survivors transformed into birds, turkeys, and butterflies. End of the third world. The fourth sun was called Nahui Atl, 4 water. It was ruled by Chalchutlique, goddess of lakes and rivers, whose name means she of the jade skirt. For 52 years, rain fell without ceasing. Not storms, not downpours. 52 years of continuous, unrelenting water falling from the sky. The entire world became ocean. People transformed into fish. Only 2 survived, Tata and Nene, hidden in a hollowed tree trunk. End of the fourth world. Now we reach the crux, the 5th sun, the current era, Nahui Olin, 4 movement. After the flood, the gods gathered in Teotihuacan, the sacred city that had existed thousands of years before the Aztecs. The ruins of its pyramids jutted from the earth like bones of an ancient world. They had to create a new sun. Someone had to sacrifice themselves. Someone had to leap into the fire. Two candidates stood before the divine bonfire. Tenochtitlan, wealthy, beautiful, adorned with gold and jade, rings on his fingers, quetzal feathers in his hair, skin anointed with oils. And Nanahuatzin, poor, covered in sores, ugly as sin. His body reeked of disease, his face scarred beyond recognition. Tenochtitlan approached the fire first. Flames licked the air before his face. Heat steamed the sweat from his brow. He stepped back, approached again, stepped back again. 4 times he tried, and 4 times his courage failed. The gods began to murmur their displeasure. Then Nanahuatzin, without a word, hurled himself straight into the flames. Fire engulfed his body, skin crackled and split, sores exploded in clouds of steam. And from the ashes emerged the sun. Tenochtitlan, shamed, leaped after him. He too emerged as a luminous body. The gods decided 2 suns in the sky was excessive. One of them hurled a rabbit into Tenochtitlan's face, dimming his brilliance. Thus was born the moon. That is why, to this day, when you look at a full moon, you can see the shape of a rabbit. A complication arose immediately. The sun stood still. It refused to move. Nanahuatzin, now Tonatiuh, demanded sacrifice from the remaining gods. Not prayers, not incense, blood. The Florentine Codex, the most important source of knowledge about the Aztecs, compiled by the Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagún with Aztec elders, describes it thus.
All the gods sacrificed themselves, tore out their own hearts, and gave them to the sun so it could move across the sky.
A debt was incurred. The gods paid with their own blood for the sun's movement. Now it was humanity's turn. This is the foundation of the Aztec worldview. The concept called Nextilahuali, repayment of debt. The gods gave their lives so we could exist. Every day the sun must fight to survive. Humans must supply it with fuel, otherwise the 5th sun will end like the previous 4, in cataclysm. A chronicler recorded from the testimony of Aztec elders.
Just as the Aztecs received a steady supply of goods, services, and people from the 4 corners of their empire, so they felt their mission was to deliver an unceasing supply of precious water to power divine work.
The worst awaited at the end of each cycle, the Tzitzimime, star demons. Depicted in codices as skeletal female figures with claws instead of hands, eyes gleaming like stars on a moonless night, hair bristling like spikes of light. They wore skirts adorned with skulls and shin bones. They waited in the darkness between stars, patiently, for thousands of years. Their leader was Itzpapalotl, the obsidian butterfly. The Codex warned that during solar eclipses, these demons would descend to Earth and devour humanity. During every solar eclipse, the Aztecs panicked. They screamed, made noise, beat drums, they banged pots, whistled, stomped their feet. Not from joy, from terror. They believed they were watching the Tzitzimime gnaw at the sun, trying to extinguish it. If the sun were extinguished for good, if blood ran out, the Tzitzimime would descend upon the earth and consume humanity. End of the 5th world. End of everything. Every 52 years, when the ritual and solar calendars converged at a single point, the Aztecs conducted the new fire ceremony. Every flame in the entire empire was extinguished, in homes, temples, palaces. Pregnant women were locked in granaries, their faces painted blue to prevent them from transforming into monsters. Children were forbidden to sleep, lest they turn into mice. Atop the hill of the star, Huixactecatl, priests waited for the Pleiades to reach their zenith. Then came the sacrifice. A priest cut open a captive's chest and attempted to kindle fire directly in his open chest cavity using a wooden drill. If the fire ignited, the world would survive another 52 years. If not, no one wants to think about what would happen. The last such ceremony took place 14 years before the empire's fall. When Hernán Cortés stood before the Aztec temples, he could not believe his eyes. He wrote to King Charles V.
Why does this land give such great honor to the devil? Allow us, Lord, to serve you in this country.
To him, it was madness. In Aztec eyes, it was physics, the mechanics of the universe. The sun needs blood to move, just as a mill needs water to grind grain, just as a furnace needs wood to give heat. Where to get blood? From war. Every Aztec boy, from the moment of birth, was destined to be a warrior. This was not a choice, it was a cosmic obligation. When a woman gave birth to a son, the midwife held a miniature shield and small bow with arrows. She placed them on the newborn's chest and spoke the formula recorded in the codex. This is your fate. You are a soldier of the sun. Your task is to capture precious water for the gods. A lock of hair called piochtli, literally meaning tuft, was left on the crown of the child's head. This lock carried immense significance. It could not be cut until the boy captured his first enemy in battle, until he delivered his first offering. The pressure was enormous. You walk through the city with this tuft on your head. Everyone sees you have not yet taken anyone captive, that you are not yet a real man, that you have not yet paid your debt to the sun. Boys wore this tuft from age 10 until their first battlefield success. The education system was two-track and extraordinarily brutal. For sons of commoners, there were schools called telpoch-kali, houses of youth. Boys entered at age 15 and spent roughly 5 years in grueling training. Each district of Tenochtitlan had its own telpoch-kali. Each housed between 400 and over 500 students. The day began before dawn. Cold bath. Not warm, cold. Lake water in January. Then prayers to Tezcatlipoca. Then breakfast, if you could call it that. The Codex Mendoza provides exact portions. A 3-year-old received half a corn tortilla, a 5-year-old 1 whole tortilla, a 12-year-old 1.5. That was it for the entire day. Then physical labor, building canals, hauling wood, repairing causeways. Not for money, for toughening the body. The Aztecs believed hunger and exhaustion were the finest teachers. Only in the afternoon did actual military training begin, learning to throw javelins with the atlatl, a wooden throwing device that multiplied the arm's power and range. Learning to fight with the macawitl, the obsidian-bladed club. Learning battle formations. Learning war songs that serve not only to boost morale, but also to transmit orders amid the chaos of battle. The most essential part of education was discipline, and discipline meant pain. For disobedience, laziness, lying, or tardiness, punishments were administered that we would consider inhuman today, piercing the body with maguey thorns, a plant with sharp, needle-thick leaf tips. Young priests during each of the 18 annual festivals had to draw blood 7 times each night and 5 times each day. Over 4 years of training, that amounts to more than 17,000 punctures. Another punishment was inhaling smoke from burning chili peppers. Children were held directly over smouldering peppers. The smoke caused agonizing burning in the eyes, nose, and lungs. The chronicler recorded, they were punished with beatings, prickings with maguey thorns, and even exposure of face and eyes to the acrid smoke of burning chili peppers. They were also forced to sleep on bare, wet ground, beaten publicly, sometimes to unconsciousness. The harshest punishment concerned alcohol. The drink, called pulque, made from fermented maguey sap, was forbidden to anyone who had not achieved veteran warrior status. A young man caught drinking could be publicly beaten. As an example, for sons of nobility, there was a different path. The Kalmakak, House of the Lineage. These schools were located on temple grounds, under the care of priests of Quetzalcoatl. Boys entered earlier, between ages 5 and 13. The curriculum was far broader. Astronomy, calendrics, rhetoric, poetry, law, theology. Future rulers and priests had to understand not just how to fight, but why. Discipline here was even stricter. Kalmakak students awoke in the middle of the night for bloodletting rituals. They pierced their ears, legs, tongues with maguey thorns. Sahagun recorded that even girls who attended the Kalmakak had ritual scars pressed into their hips and chests. Blood dripped onto strips of bark paper, which were then burned as offerings. They learned to endure pain because pain was the gateway to holiness. From age 15, Kalmakak students trained under experienced warriors from the Eagle and Jaguar orders. The advancement system was based on the number of captured enemies. The Codex describes it precisely. When one captured 4 prisoners in battle, Montezuma allowed him to cut his hair in the manner of an experienced warrior. When a young warrior took his first captive, something transformative occurred. He could finally cut that piochtli tuft from his head. He received the title Tlamani and a special cloak with floral motifs. He earned the right to wear sandals, which, in a society where the poor went barefoot, was a mark of status. 2 captured victims earned the title Quetzalcoatl. the right to wear a conical cap with coloured feathers, red, blue and green, plus a red and black war costume. Crucially, the right to wear sandals on the battlefield. 3 captured victims meant the title Papalotl, butterfly. A cloak bearing the butterfly symbol, a special pennant worn on the back, higher food rations. The true breakthrough came with the 4th victim. 4 captured enemies opened doors to the elite, to the warrior orders. The title Quauhotholotl, Eagle Jaguar, the right to wear jaguar skin or a feathered eagle costume, the right to consume human flesh during state ceremonies. The eagle warriors, Quautli, wore costumes made of feathers with helmets shaped like eagle heads. The helmets were made from bark encrusted with feathers. The warrior's face peered out from the open beak. They were bound to Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun. The jaguar warriors, Ocelotl, dressed in real jaguar skins with the great cat's heads as helmets. The costume covered the entire body. The warrior appeared as a man-beast. They were bound to Tezcatlipoca, god of night and destiny. These 2 orders were not enemies. They were 2 sides of the same coin, day and night, sun and its absence. Together they formed cosmic balance. They also served as palace guard and imperial police force. A higher rank, a Tontin, named after the valiant Otomi tribe, required 5 or 6 captured victims. Blood-red war costume, a shield adorned with eagle talons, a great feathered pennant on the back. One more group existed, the most mysterious, the most terrifying. The Coachique, the Shorn Ones. To join them, 6 victims were not enough. You first had to belong to the eagles or jaguars. You had to demonstrate at least 20 acts of exceptional battlefield valor. You had to swear an oath that chilled the blood. I will never retreat before the enemy. I would rather depart this world than flee. The Coachique shaved their heads, leaving only a single braid behind the left ear. They painted their faces half blue, half red. They wore yellow war costumes. They fought on the front line, always, regardless of circumstances. If a Coachique retreated in battle, his own comrades were obligated to eliminate him. On the spot, without delay. These warriors deliberately refused promotions to command positions so they could remain on the front line. Combat and the end were their only purpose. 4 captured victims brought one more privilege: the right to participate in ritual feasts where tlacatlaoli was served, a stew of corn and human flesh. The right to drink pulque, forbidden to younger men. The right to keep concubines. The right to wear jewelry, gold armbands, nose and earplugs. The right to enter the royal court. Before you feel revulsion at these rituals, you must understand the context. In Aztec eyes, this was not barbarism, it was communion. The victim offered to the gods became, for a moment, a god themselves. Their body contained divine essence. Consuming this flesh was a religious act, not a culinary one. Incorporation of holiness, not satisfaction of hunger. Now we must understand what these warriors fought with. The Aztecs never discovered iron. They had no steel, no bronze, yet they created a weapon capable of cutting a horse in half. The macohuitl, a wooden club 70 to 120 centimeters long, about 8 to 10 centimeters wide, shaped like a paddle or cricket bat. Along both edges, rows of obsidian blades were embedded. Various versions existed. The standard macohuitl had 6 to 8 blades per side. A smaller version called Macohuitzochtli measured about 50 centimeters and was used one-handed. Two-handed versions, described by the Spanish as tall as a man, required both hands to swing. The wood used was oak or pine. It had to be hard and durable. Blades were set into grooves along the edges. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It forms when lava cools so rapidly it cannot crystallize. The Aztecs sourced it primarily from Sierra de las Navajas, the Mountains of Razors, located about 50 kilometers northeast of Tenochtitlan. Recent research published in the journal PNAS analyzed nearly 800 obsidian artifacts from Templo Mayor. 90% came from Sierra de Pachuca, a greenish variant called Tolteca Itztli, obsidian of the masters. The physics of this material astonishes to this day. Obsidian, properly worked using a technique called pressure flaking, creates edges only 3 atoms thick. For comparison, the finest steel razor has an edge 500 atoms thick. Modern surgeons use obsidian scalpels in eye microsurgery and neurosurgery. Medical studies show that a steel scalpel under a microscope looks like a saw with uneven teeth. An obsidian one is perfectly smooth. It can slice a single cell in half without damaging neighboring ones. Each blade in a macahuitl was about 3 centimeters long. They were secured in grooves using natural resins. Primarily bitumen, a petroleum product occurring naturally in some regions of Mexico, pine resin or resin from mesquite and huizache trees, types of acacia, was also used. Spanish chroniclers wrote that the blades were so well secured they could not be pulled or pried out. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a soldier from Cortés's expedition, left descriptions that inspired genuine terror among the conquistadors. He recorded, "Pedro de Morón was a very good horseman, and when he charged with 3 other horsemen into enemy ranks, the Indians grabbed his lance, then dealt such a blow to the mare's neck that they cut off her head at the skin, and she fell lifeless on the spot." Similar accounts came from other expedition members. Francisco de Aguilar noted, "One Indian with a single blow cut through the entire neck of Cristobal de Olid's horse." Díaz del Castillo also wrote that these swords cut like Toledan steel, and Toledo blades were the finest steel in contemporary Europe. Was complete decapitation of a horse with one blow possible? Modern experimental archaeology has attempted verification. In tests on pig carcasses, the macahuitl did indeed inflict wounds deeper than European swords. Complete decapitation with a single blow is improbable, but serious injuries, severing muscles and arteries, absolutely realistic. The macahuitl had one dark feature the Spanish did not immediately recognize. Obsidian is brittle. Upon striking a hard surface, bone, steel armor, or even another obsidian blade, it shatters into thousands of microscopic fragments. These fragments remain in the victim's body. Dr. Marco Severa Obregon, a Mexican archaeologist specializing in pre-Columbian weaponry, explains, "The true advantage of the macahuitl lay not in killing, but in inflicting wounds that could never heal. Embedded obsidian fragments were as dangerous as the cut itself." One modern reconstructor described it thus: "Small fragments flew off with such velocity they embedded in skin and clothing. Larger ones caused serious wounds. Small ones simply went deep. After a few days, they began to fester." A wound full of glass splinters so tiny they cannot be seen with the naked eye. Impossible to remove. No technology existed to do so. Every movement drove the fragments deeper into muscle. Infection was inevitable. Fever, suppuration, slow, agonizing decline. The macahuitl did not merely wound. The macahuitl condemned to suffering. Obsidian blades had a weakness too. They shattered when striking other obsidian blades, steel swords, or plate armor. They struggled to penetrate European chainmail. Spanish padded armor, adapted from the Aztecs themselves, called ichchahuipili, a thick quilted jacket soaked in salt water, proved effective against obsidian. Other weapons existed as well. The atlatl, a spear thrower multiplying the arm's power and range. Tepos topili, spears with obsidian points. Tematlatl, slings for hurling stones. Chimali, round shields of wood and leather, often lavishly decorated with feathers. Workshops producing weapons were located on palace grounds. 2 armories employed specialized craftsmen. Amanteca, featherworkers, created costumes and arms for elite orders there. The last original macahuitl to survive into modern times burned in a fire at the Royal Armoury in Madrid in the late 19th century. A smaller specimen, 50 centimeters long, was reportedly discovered during Mexico City's subway construction in the 1960s. A third, badly damaged, was displayed at the Templo Mayor Museum a few years ago. Everything we have today beyond that consists of copies and reconstructions. A weapon is just a tool. What matters more is how it was used. And the Aztecs used it in ways that surprised even the most experienced European soldiers. Xochitlán, the Flowery Wars. Perhaps the most extraordinary military institution in world history. To understand it, you must go back to the mid-15th century. A great drought. 4 years of almost total rainfall failure. Maize would not grow, lakes dried up, people suffered famine. Priests in Tenochtitlan sought answers. They found them in their cosmology. The gods were angry. The gods were hungry. They must be given more blood. Ixtlilxochitl, a nobleman from Texcoco who recorded this history, noted, The priests said the gods were angry with the empire, and to appease them, many people must be sacrificed, and this must be done regularly. Where to get blood when the empire was exhausted by war and famine? Here enters one of the most fascinating minds in pre-Columbian American history, Tlacaelel, Cihuacuatl, chief advisor to the ruler, a man who survived the reigns of 4 consecutive kings and probably wielded more power than all of them combined. Tlacaelel lived nearly 90 years, 3 times the average lifespan of that era. In his youth, he helped his uncle Itzcoatl defeat the Tepanecs and form the Triple Alliance with Texcoco and Tlacopan. He elevated Huitzilopochtli to the summit of the pantheon, merging him with Tonatiuh, the sun god. He ordered the old codices burned to erase memory of the times when the Aztecs were nobodies. He conceived the idea of the Flowery Wars. Since the empire needed a constant supply of victims and continuous warfare depleted resources, a system was required. An agreement with enemies for regular skirmishes whose sole purpose would be supplying captives. Tlacaelel compared these wars to a marketplace. The chronicler Diego Duran recorded his words. "This is like a market or fair where our lord Huitzilopochtli comes to buy offerings, paying for them as for food and drink." Partners in this arrangement became the city-states of the Puebla Valley, Tlaxcala, Cholula, Huechotzingo, Atlisco. Theoretically mortal enemies, practically suppliers of human flesh. Rules were precisely defined. Battles took place at designated sites called Cuautlali or Yautlali, sacred ground. Dates were arranged in advance by officials from both sides. Both sides fielded equal numbers of well-trained warriors. The signal to begin was the ignition of a great pile of paper and incense between the armies. The most important rule? The goal was not to kill the opponent, the goal was to capture him alive. A document describing the course of battle, step by step, has survived to our time. Battles began ritually. Aztec warriors appeared in full regalia, bearing ancestral banners. The Huehuetl and Teponaztli drums beat the rhythm. Their sound held religious and signaling significance. Combat was formal. Lines approached slowly. No violent initial charge. Priority: capture a living opponent capable of walking. Attacks targeted legs, shoulders, neck. Head strikes were often controlled, not lethal. Grappling holds were employed. That is why the Macahuitl was designed as it was. Its flat side could stun an opponent. Blades could be dulled before battle to wound but not immediately kill. Warriors also used bolas, cords with weights to entangle legs, Diaz del Castillo recorded. They did not try to kill us. They wanted to capture us alive. Many of my companions fell, but were not finished off. When an opponent hit the ground, others swarmed him in groups. Hair pulling was described repeatedly. That Piochtli tuft every young man wore on his head made a perfect handle. Knock down, grab by the hair, hold until helpers arrived with ropes. After immobilization, hands were bound with maguey fibers or leather straps. If a captive resisted, fingers or jaw were broken, without mercy. Then the captive was marked. Ears or nose were pierced, wooden collars or neck ropes were fastened. From that moment, the captive belonged to the specific warrior who had seized him. For the warrior, capture was honorable. It was called Xochimicuitztli, flowery death, the most beautiful fate imaginable, guaranteed passage to the paradise of Huitzilopochtli, where the souls of warriors accompany the sun on its daily journey across the sky. Montezuma II told the Spanish, "We could easily conquer Tlaxcala, but then we would have nowhere to train our young warriors." Many captives went to their fate willingly. They did not try to escape. They did not beg for mercy. For them, it was an honor. The Spanish could not comprehend this. During their first clashes, they were completely bewildered. Instead of finishing them off, the Indians tried to knock them down and tie them up. This tactic paradoxically saved many Spanish lives, including Cortés himself, who was captured several times and nearly dragged from the battlefield before comrades managed to free him. Historian Ross Hassig observes that the Aztecs killed their Spanish opponents whenever they had the chance and adapted quickly. Not at first, but once they understood they faced a different kind of enemy, they changed tactics. In one late campaign battle, the Aztecs used a feigned retreat to lure the Spanish into an ambush. Captured conquistadors were sacrificed on temple steps. Their heads were severed and thrown toward the Spanish camp with shouts that these were the heads of Cortés and Sandoval. There is one more story I must tell you. The story of Tlahuicole, a warrior from Tlaxcala, a man of legendary strength of Otomi descent. Chronicles say he fought with a club so heavy an ordinary soldier could barely lift it from the ground. He commanded Tlaxcalan forces in border wars. His name alone was enough to make enemies flee without fighting. One day he was captured, probably by warriors from Huayotzingo allied with the Aztecs. He was brought to Tenochtitlan before Montezuma II himself. Montezuma was so impressed that he did something unprecedented. He offered Tlahuicole freedom. Simply return home, no sacrifice, no conditions. In Aztec history, there had never been such a case. Tlahuicole refused. Diego Muñoz Camargo recorded in his History of Tlaxcala. He told Montezuma it would be shameful to return to his homeland as a defeated man. He preferred to meet the fate of other captives. Montezuma tried differently. He offered him command of the Aztec army in the war against the Tarascans, a tribe from the west that had successfully resisted conquest. They called themselves Purepecha. They had bronze weapons the Aztecs could not produce. Tlahuicole agreed, hoping for a glorious end in battle. He led Aztec forces to the city of Tangimoroa, which the Aztecs called Tlaximaloyan in what is now Mexico. He broke through the Tarascan army, which mounted desperate resistance, and defeated them repeatedly. He returned to Tenochtitlan laden with spoils and leading a long procession of captives. Montezuma wanted to make him permanent supreme commander. Again, he refused. To accept such a position would mean betraying Tlaxcala. To return to Tlaxcala as one who had served the enemy would stain his honor. Finally, Montezuma relented. Tlahuicole received what he had requested. Tlahuahuanalistli, the gladiatorial sacrifice. He was tied by one leg to a great circular gladiator stone called the Temalacatl. He was given a shield and macuahuitl, but with feathers instead of obsidian blades. Ornamental weaponry, incapable of inflicting serious wounds. Against him stood the finest warriors of Tenochtitlan, armed with real weapons. Diego Muñoz Camargo and Diego Duran describe it in detail. Tlahuicole killed 8 opponents. 8 renowned warriors of Anahuac attacked him one by one, and all were defeated. He wounded another 20. Only the 9th opponent, an eagle warrior who had fought in earlier battles, managed to bring him down with a powerful, unexpected kick to the stomach. Priests rushed to the writhing warrior. They cut his bonds and carried him to the sacrificial stone, where his heart was removed and offered to Huitzilopochtli. Celebrations lasted 8 days. His ashes were placed in a temple with honors. His story became legend on both sides of the conflict and is told to this day. Here we arrive at the most perverse aspect of the Flowery Wars. Tlaxcala was never conquered by the Aztecs. For 200 years. Despite being completely surrounded by imperial territory, deprived of access to salt, cotton, luxury goods, living under permanent siege. Why? Some historians, like Ross Hassig and Nigel Davis, argue the Flowery Wars were more than ritual, they were a political tool. Military training for young warriors, a mechanism for social advancement, perhaps a strategy for slowly exhausting an enemy who could not be defeated in a single strike. Others believe the Tlaxcalans were simply too strong, that mountainous terrain and the desperation of a people surrounded on all sides made conquest impossible. The truth lies somewhere in between. The consequences were unambiguous. When Cortés arrived, Tlaxcala became his most important ally. After a week of fighting to test the newcomer's strength, an alliance was forged. 200 years of Flowery Wars, 200 years of humiliation and fear transformed into unyielding thirst for revenge. Over 6,000 warriors from Tlaxcala, and according to some sources, as many as 250,000 throughout the campaign, joined Cortés. Now we must see what happened to captives after their seizure. A captive did not immediately reach the sacrificial stone. Sometimes days passed, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. All that time was spent in strange suspension between life and what awaited. Transport began right after battle. Captives were marched on foot, often naked or half-naked. They were forced to dance and sing along the way. In cities, they were put on public display. Duran recorded, "Captives walked among crowds that spat on them, beat them with sticks, and mocked them, for they were already dead in the eyes of the gods." Wooden collars called quaucoscatl were placed around their necks. Sometimes several captives were linked in a row, rope threaded through pierced nasal septums. Ears or nose were pierced immediately after capture. This was a mark of ownership. From that moment, the captive belonged to the specific warrior who had seized him. In Tenochtitlan itself, something changed. The captive ceased to be an enemy. He became a sacred person. The waiting period ranged from a few days to several months. Captives were fed, not fattened, but kept alive and healthy. Guards were assigned to watch them constantly. Suicide was strictly forbidden. A person destined for sacrifice had to reach the end at full strength. Ritual humiliation mixed with elevation. Captives were made to wear divine garments, dressed in the costume of the deity to whom they would be offered. If destined for Huitzilopochtli, they wore blue and red. If for Tlaloc, they were adorned with jade and green feathers. They were called by the deity's name, treated as living incarnations. Sahagun recorded, "He who was to depart was treated as the god himself, but everyone knew he was only flesh for the gods." They were taught sacred dances, songs to sing while ascending the pyramid, gestures to perform before the priests. The captive was to play a role, not merely be a victim. He was to become part of a cosmic performance. There is one detail sources emphasize clearly. Captives sometimes sang willingly before the end, not from compulsion, from conviction they were going to a better place. Refusal to dance was punished with immediate death, without ceremony, without honor, without a place in the warrior's paradise. A brutal blow to the head, and that was all. Therefore, most cooperated. And then the day arrived. The procession began at dawn. Huehuetel and Teponaztli drums beat a rhythm that drowned out all other sounds. Crowds stood on both sides of the road, women, men, children, all watching. Templo Mayor had 114 steps, each step over 20 centimeters high. The captive climbed alone. Behind him, priests in black robes, hair matted with dried blood, ears and tongues pierced from ritual bloodletting. At the summit awaited the Tenochtitlan, the sacrificial stone, a curved block that bent the body backward, exposing the chest. Victims were arched so forcefully that ribs cracked. 6 priests participated in the ritual. 4 seized the limbs, holding arms and legs. A 5th held the head and throat. The 6th, called the Tlena Makak, held the knife. Tenochtitlan, the sacrificial knife. A lance-shaped, double-edged blade of obsidian or flint, 15 to 25 centimeters long. Some were personified, with carved faces, eyes inlaid with obsidian or shell, teeth of white flint. Excavations at Templo Mayor uncovered over 1,000 such knives. On some, traces of blood survived: iron, albumin, hemoglobin. The incision ran beneath the left rib arch, 20 to 25 centimeters. The hand entered the chest cavity, grasped the heart, extracted it in a single motion. Andrés de Tapia, a soldier under Cortés, wrote,
We saw heart still beating in the priest's hands, while blood flowed down the steps like a stream.
The heart, still beating, was raised toward the sun. Then placed in a quachicali, a stone vessel shaped like an eagle. Blood ran down the pyramid steps. The body was thrown down, 114 steps. At the bottom, at the foot of the stairs, lay a stone disc over 3 meters in diameter, bearing the image of Coyolxauhqui, Huitzilopochtli's sister, whom the war god had dismembered and hurled from the mountain. Every sacrifice reenacted this myth. Every body landed on the statue of the dismembered goddess. But it was not over. The head was severed and impaled on a wooden pole of the Zompantli, the skull rack. Andrés de Tapia, who counted personally, reported 136,000 skulls on the main Zompantli at Templo Mayor. Duran mentions 60,000. Diaz del Castillo also reports 136,000. The great structure at Templo Mayor, the Huid Zompantli, measured, according to descriptions, 60 meters long and 30 meters wide. A wooden palisade with 60 to 70 massive posts. Skulls were pierced from temple to temple and strung on horizontal wooden poles. A few years ago, archaeologists discovered remains of this structure. To date, over 600 skulls have been recovered. A cylindrical tower measured over 5 meters in diameter. Skulls were bonded with a morite of lime, sand, and volcanic gravel. 3 construction phases were identified, spanning several generations. The surprise came from demographic analysis. Biological anthropologist Lorena Vasquez of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History stated, We expected only men, of course young men, since they were supposed to be warriors. Something is happening that we have no record of. Among the skulls were women, children. At least 3 children's skulls were identified in early excavation phases. Roughly 25% came from women and children. Perhaps the victims were not always warriors. Perhaps there were other rituals the chronicles do not mention. Perhaps our knowledge is incomplete. Bodies were allocated for further rituals. The Codex describes the division. Thus, they divided their captive into 6 parts. The first, who was the true captor, took his body and one of the thighs, the one with the right foot. Arms and thighs, the best parts, went to the aristocracy and the ruler himself. The left thigh was divided among the other warriors who helped with the capture, up to 5 men. The torso went to the royal zoo as food for predators. The rest was divided among the family of the warrior who made the capture. The warrior himself did not eat. The Codex explains, "He did not eat his captive's flesh, for he said, 'Am I to eat my own flesh?' For when he captured him, he said, 'He is my beloved son.' And the captive said, 'He is my beloved father.'" In Aztec eyes, capture created a bond of kinship. Warrior and victim became family. Therefore, consuming the captive's flesh would be like ritually consuming one's own relative. The flesh was cooked with corn and tomatoes. The dish was called tlacat laoli, human with corn. Sahagun recorded, "The victim's flesh was washed, cut into pieces, and boiled with corn. It was consumed without hot spices, as chili might desecrate the holiness." During agricultural ceremonies, squash blossoms and sweet broth were added instead of spicy sauce. Toribio de Benavente Motolinia, a Franciscan who arrived in Mexico a few years after the conquest, recorded, "They ate human bodies without disgust, for they believed they were eating divinity." The victim, before departing, was dressed as a god. Called by the god's name, during the period before the ceremony, they became Ixiptla, an embodiment of the deity. Their body contained divine essence. Consuming this flesh was not an act of barbarism, it was communion, incorporation of holiness. Some historians argue that Aztec practices were a response to protein deficiency in the diet. The Valley of Mexico had no large animals to domesticate, no cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, llamas. Others refuted this theory. They calculated that even 15,000 victims annually amounted to merely 1 bite of hamburger per day for the elite. The Aztec diet included 40 species of waterfowl, fish, insects, beans, corn. Chinampa agriculture, a system of artificial island gardens on the lake, was highly productive. Rituals coincided with harvest season, not famine. If protein were the issue, the entire population would have consumed this flesh, not just the elite. The current scientific consensus, human sacrifice undoubtedly occurred. Archaeological evidence confirms it. Primary motivations were religious and cosmological. Political intimidation was a secondary purpose. Now let us proceed to the event that terrified even the Aztecs themselves. The dedication ceremony of Templo Mayor at the end of the 15th century. The ruler was Ahuitzotl, 8th Tlatoani, supreme ruler of Tenochtitlan. The pyramid had just been expanded to its 6th and final form. It was also a celebration honoring Tlacaelel, the great strategist, who had departed that same year after nearly 90 years of life. The ceremonies lasted 4 days, just before the winter solstice. Colonial sources provide horrifying numbers of victims. Duran speaks of 80,400. 80,000 in 4 days. That is 20,000 daily, over 800 per hour, 14 per minute, 1 every 4 seconds. Other sources, based on testimonies of elderly Aztecs given to missionaries, provide a much smaller figure, around 4,000. Is the higher number possible? Ross Hassig calculated throughput. With 80 priests performing 20 extractions per hour for 20 hours daily over 4 days, maximum possible is approximately 6,400. Templo Mayor had 4 sacrificial stones. The city had 15 additional temples. At full mobilization, 10 to 20,000 is realistic. 80,000 is not. Even that lower number, even 4,000, makes this ceremony one of the largest single acts of ritual violence in human history. Lines of captives stretched along the causeways leading to the city. Priests worked in shifts. They fainted from exhaustion. Their hands grew so tired from extracting hearts they could no longer hold the knives. Diaz del Castillo, when he entered these temples over 30 years later, wrote,
The walls and floor around that idol were so splattered with blood, and the stench was worse than any Spanish slaughterhouse.
We arrive at the question that plagued the Spanish and that we ask ourselves to this day. Why? The answer is simple and terrible at once. In Aztec eyes, this was not cruelty. It was duty. It was love. They loved the sun. They loved the gods who had sacrificed themselves for them at Teotihuacan. They repaid that debt in the only currency of value: blood. The universe was a machine. Blood was the lubricant. Without it, the sun would stand still. Earth would be devoured by the tzitzimime. Everything would end in darkness. Every sacrifice extended the world's life by one more day. Every extracted heart was an act of desperate love for existence. Now you understand why the Aztecs could not stop. Why, when their system collapsed, everything collapsed. Before we proceed to the end, we must visit the south, the jungles of Yucatan and the mountains of Guatemala. There lived another civilization that found its own ways to feed the gods. The Maya did not build an empire. They built dozens of small kingdoms that fought, traded, forged alliances, and betrayed one another for over 2,000 years. They shared one thing: the belief that the blood of kings was the most precious gift to the gods. The difference between Aztecs and Maya is fundamental. The Aztecs sacrificed thousands of captives. The Maya focused on quality, not quantity. Very often the victim was elite, including rulers themselves. Kinich Ahau, the Maya sun god, descended every night to the underworld called Xibalba, the place of fright. There he battled demons. Every morning he emerged victorious. That battle cost him strength. That strength had to be replenished. A solar eclipse was cosmic catastrophe. A broken sun, the signal that Kinich Ahau was losing. That immediate action was required. The Maya possessed something the Aztecs never achieved: a calendar so precise they could predict solar eclipses centuries in advance. The Dresden Codex, a manuscript from the turn of the 11th and 12th centuries, contains eclipse tables based on overlapping lunar cycles that self-corrected for astronomical drift. They allowed predictions of eclipses 700 years ahead. Scientists tested these tables against an eclipse in the late 20th century. The tables predicted it to the day. For the Maya, an eclipse meant the sun was under attack, that Kinich Ahau was losing, that immediate action was required. Here enters the ritual of Chab, blood penance. No captive was sacrificed, one sacrificed oneself. Cosmologically, the Maya believed that the gods had sacrificed their own divine blood to create humans. Bloodletting repaid that debt. Blood symbolized itz, force or truth permeating the cosmos. Bloodletting opened a portal to the other world, enabling communication with gods and ancestors. Who performed this? Kings, called ajau, were obligated to draw blood at every important political event. Queens and royal women were central figures in these rituals. Both men and women participated. Men pierced their genitals. Women most often pierced their tongues. When? Coronations, building dedications, conclusions of katuns, 20-year periods, births, marriages, funerals, war commemorations, agricultural rituals. The most famous depiction of this ritual is found at Yaxchilan, a city on the Usumacinta River in what is now the Mexican state of Chiapas. In Structure 23, the so-called House of the Queen, 3 stone lintels were discovered that tell a story that makes your hair stand on end. Lintel 24. Currently in the British Museum in London, created in the early 8th century. We see King Shield Jaguar II standing with a blazing torch. Beside him kneels his wife, Lady Kabal Zouk, Lady Zok. Both wear pectorals depicting the sun god and elaborate feathered headdresses. Through her tongue passes a thick rope studded with obsidian fragments. This is not symbolism, this is a literal depiction of the ritual. The queen threads a barbed rope through her pierced tongue. Blood scrolls are visible on her face. Blood drips onto strips of bark paper lying in a basket at her feet. The lintel was commissioned to commemorate the birth of Shield Jaguar's son. On the next lintel, we see what happens afterward. Lady Hock stares at an enormous 2-headed serpent rising from a bowl filled with bloodied papers. She holds a bowl containing a stingray spine, an obsidian lancet, and blood-stained papers. From the serpent's maw emerges a warrior in full regalia, probably Yat Balam, founder of the Yaxchilan dynasty, an ancestor from 400 years before. This is the vision serpent, the most important serpent deity among the Maya, a gateway between the physical world and the spirit world. Most commonly depicted with a bearded, rounded snout, often two-headed, gods, ancestors, or warriors emerge from open jaws. On the third lintel, Lady Shock hands her husband a jaguar helmet before battle. She herself wears a headdress normally reserved for kings. This shows her exceptional status. Excavations in Structure 23 revealed 146 prismatic obsidian blades with lateral notches, bloodletting tools. How did it work? How could piercing a tongue induce visions of ancestors? Modern science has an answer. Massive blood loss causes the brain to produce endorphins, the same substances released during extreme physical exertion, stress, or opiate use. They cause euphoria, detachment from reality, hallucinations. Stingray spines, mainly from the species Daciatis, the Atlantic stingray, contain venom. Fresh spines cause tissue necrosis in about 2/3 of cases and can be fatal. Were the venom's effects intentional, inducing altered states of consciousness? The debate continues. Add to this the burning of blood-soaked paper, copal smoke inhaled in an enclosed temple chamber, hours or even days of fasting before the ritual, monotonous chanting and drums. Under such conditions, hallucinations are inevitable. Maya rulers literally saw their ancestors. They conversed with gods. They received prophecies and guidance. They paid for it with their own blood. Not the blood of some captive, their own. Quantitative studies analysed nearly 2,500 Maya hieroglyphic texts from over 70 sites in the southern lowlands. 69 documented instances of Cha'ab were identified. The results were surprising. Documentation of bloodletting concentrated in contexts of political antagonism. This was not an evenly distributed cosmological ritual. It was a political instrument. Sites showed strong homophily. Those documenting bloodletting more frequently shared political ties with other sites documenting bloodletting. Rituals spread through elite networks, not spatial diffusion. Geographic concentration was striking. Over 40% of all documented bloodletting rituals occurred at just 2 sites, Copan and Yaxchilan. Despite the cosmological universality of the doctrine, documented elite practice was highly localized. This was something more than religion. It was a political system, demonstrating to subjects that the king was willing to suffer for his people, that his bond with the gods was real and costly. A costly signal of credibility, as anthropologists term it. The risk was real, physiological, inflammation, tissue necrosis, impaired fertility. There was also the boar game, pits, pock to pock, the oldest team sport in human history. Courts were built over 3,500 years ago. The oldest rubber balls found date even earlier. The rules were simple, but the game was difficult. A rubber ball from the Castilla elastica tree, weight from 1.5 to nearly 3 kilograms, diameter from 25 to 30 centimeters. Struck with hips, knees, elbows. Some versions allowed forearms. Never with hands, feet, or head. Keep the ball moving. Do not let it drop. Players wore special protective gear. Yugos, ceremonial stone hip belts. Playing versions were made of wicker or wood. Knee guards, helmets, headdresses. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza, the largest known, is nearly 100 meters long and 30 meters wide. Over 1,300 courts have been identified throughout Mesoamerica. On court panels at Chichen Itza and El Tajín, clear decapitation scenes appear. A relief at Chichen Itza shows a headless player with 7 serpents and vegetation sprouting from his neck. Fertility symbolism, life emerging from the inevitable. Who lost their life, winner or loser? Arguments for losers, logical punishment for defeat, war captives forced to play rigged matches. Arguments for winners, the greatest honor given to the gods, a better offering than a defeated, inferior player. Christoph Helmke of the University of Copenhagen summarizes current consensus. It would be really terrible if the best players were killed all the time. Probably sacrifice was not an integral part of most matches. It may have occurred during specific ritual games, not regularly. There is also the legend of skulls as balls. Popular imagination holds that the Maya covered enemy skulls with layers of rubber and used them to play. There is no archaeological evidence for this. All balls found are solid rubber. Academic consensus: depictions are symbolic or mythological, referencing the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya. In that myth, the hero Hunahpu's head, after his defeat by the lords of Xibalba, is hung on a calabash tree. Symbolism, not literal practice. The Maya also waged wars for captives. Monuments from Yaxchilan depict kings grasping enemies by the hair in gestures of submission. Victory inscriptions recorded the calendar date, the captive's name, and the ritual context of capture. Maya and Aztecs differed in details but shared one fundamental truth: the sun is hungry. Blood is its food. Someone must pay. The year is 1521, the 13th of August. Tenochtitlan falls. Before we proceed to that day, we must go back 2 years and understand why an empire built on terror and blood collapsed so quickly. The first signs came from the sky. A year before the Spanish arrival, a comet appeared. The temple of Huitzilopochtli burned with no apparent cause. Women heard weeping in the night, a voice calling, "My children, we must flee. My children, where shall I take you?" For Montezuma II, ninth ruler of Tenochtitlan, these signs were disturbing. Nothing could prepare him for what was to come. In April 1519, ships appeared on the eastern coast. White-faced people in gleaming armor, mounted on great beasts no one had seen before. They carried sticks that spat fire and thunder. Montezuma was no fool. He was a diplomat, a strategist. He sent emissaries with gifts. He tried to understand whom he was dealing with. Gods? Messengers of gods? Ordinary humans with highly advanced technology. The myth that Aztecs believed the Spanish were gods is probably a later construction. Cortez's letters, written immediately after the events, do not mention perception of divinity. The narrative of godlikeness developed later, in secondary compilations. Matthew Restall, in his book 7 Myths of the Spanish Conquest, argues the Spanish mistook diplomatic courtesy for superstition. Camilla Townsend contends that Montezuma's measured response reflected rational assessment of Spanish military technology. Indigenous sources portray Montezuma as an experienced military leader. Diplomatic caution as rational strategy, buying time, gathering intelligence. Several months later, Cortez entered Tenochtitlan. He was a guest. Montezuma received him in his palace, fed him, showed him the city. Talks proceeded. And then everything fell apart. In Cortez's absence, he had departed for the coast to pursue another expedition. His deputy, Pedro de Alvarado, committed a massacre. During the Toxcatl festival honoring Huitzilopochtli, the Spanish attacked unarmed dancers. The following spring, hundreds killed. The city erupted. Cortez returned, but it was too late. The Spanish were besieged in the palace. Montezuma was wounded, probably by stones thrown by his own subjects, who considered him a traitor or hostage. He died in late June. The circumstances of his death remain unclear. That same night, the Spanish attempted to flee the city. La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. A rainy, moonless night. They chose the western causeway to Tlacopan. Aztec sentries raised the alarm. A mass attack from causeways and canoes. Between 450 and 600 Spanish and 1,000 to 4,000 of their indigenous allies perished. Many drowned, weighed down by gold. Cortez reportedly wept beneath a great cypress tree on the lakeshore. The Aztec Empire did not yet know it had just dealt itself the final blow. A few weeks after the Night of Sorrows, smallpox appeared in Tenochtitlan. It was brought by an African slave from the expedition sent to capture Cortez. The Codex describes, "A great plague broke out in Tenochtitlan. Sores covered our faces, chests, bellies. We were covered with painful sores from head to foot. The first wave claimed millions across Mexico. 40% of Tenochtitlan's population in 2 months. Among those who perished was Cuitlahuac, the new ruler chosen after Montezuma. He reigned 80 days and fell victim to smallpox." Early the following year, Cuauhtémoc ascended the throne, the last Aztec ruler. He was in his mid-20s. Chronicles report that many perished from this plague and others from famine, as inhabitants could not work and lay suffering in their beds. Smallpox also disrupted organization of defense and the expectation of relief. the Aztecs were plunged in chaos and despair. Here we reach the heart of the collapse. It was not just about firearms, horses, or disease. It was about the system. For 200 years, the Aztec Empire had treated conquered peoples as blood reservoirs. Tlaxcala, Cholula, Huejotzingo, Zempoala, Texcoco, 400 to 500 tributary states, tens of thousands of people annually destined for sacrifice, dozens of states nursing hatred. When Cortés arrived, he found willing allies, 6,000 to 8,000 warriors from Tlaxcala, tens of thousands from Texcoco under command of Ixtlilxóchitl II, who defected to the Spanish and assumed his city's throne. Thousands from Cholula, Chalco, other cities. This was not 600 Spanish against 250,000 Aztecs. It was 200,000 Indians against the Aztecs, with the Spanish as the detonator. Over 90% of anti-Aztec forces were indigenous. The Spanish never numbered more than 1,300. Why did Tlaxcala side with the newcomers? 200 years of flowery wars, generations of humiliation and terror. They saw in the Spanish their only chance to end the Aztec nightmare. They quickly converted to Christianity. They supplied 250,000 warriors throughout the campaign. The siege of Tenochtitlan lasted through the 3 summer months. Cortés cut the aqueduct, delivering fresh water from Chapultepec. He blockaded the causeways. He built 13 brigantines, giving him control of the lake. The Aztecs fought to the end. They defended every street, every canal, every house. They sacrificed captured Spaniards in full view of their comrades. Cortés wrote in his letter to the king,
Immediately after their victory, the enemy took all the Spaniards, both living and dead, whom they had captured, to Tlatelolco, the marketplace, and in the high towers there they sacrificed them naked, cutting open their chests and taking out their hearts to offer to the idols. The Spaniards from Alvarado's division saw this from where they were fighting, and by the whiteness of the naked bodies they saw being sacrificed, they knew they were Christians.
Díaz del Castillo in his chronicle.
The dismal drum of Huichilobos sounded again, accompanied by shells, horns, and instruments like trumpets. It was a terrifying sound, and when we looked toward the tall temple from which it came, we saw our companions, who had been captured in Cortés's defeat, being dragged up the steps to be sacrificed. When they brought them to the small platform before the shrine where they kept their cursed idols, we saw them put feathers on their heads and make them dance with something like fans before Huichilobos. Then, after they had danced, the priests laid them on their backs on narrow sacrificial stones and, cutting open their chests, took out their beating hearts, which they offered to the idols before them.
He added,
I must say that when I saw my companions dragged to the altar every day, and their chests cut open and their beating hearts taken out, and when I saw the arms and legs of those 62 men cut off and eaten, I feared that one day they would do the same to me.
That sight did not break the Spanish. They knew that the only alternative to victory was the sacrificial stone. On the 13th of August, 1521, Cuauhtémoc attempted to escape by boat across the lake. He was captured. Tenochtitlan fell after 3 months of siege. Losses were immense. Aztecs, 100 to 240,000 dead. Spanish, over 100 during the siege, around 1,800 in the entire 2-year campaign. Tlaxcalans, 20 to 30,000 across all campaigns. The population of central Mexico fell from approximately 22 million to fewer than 2 million over the next 80 years. Another mysterious epidemic, probably a form of typhoid fever, claimed even more lives. The city that had been one of the largest in the world lay in ruins. Famine, plague, ruin. A system based on endless demand for human blood collapsed under the weight of the hatred it had generated. A civilization that believed it was feeding the sun was devoured by the consequences of its own logic. You stand now in a different place. Not on a viewing terrace above Lake Texcoco, on the plaza before the Metropolitan Cathedral in Mexico City. Beneath your feet, a few meters down, lie the remains of Templo Mayor. Discovered by chance in the late 1970s when electrical workers dug a foundation for a new transformer, they found a stone disc over 3 meters in diameter. Coyolxauhqui, the dismembered sister of Huitzilopochtli. Since then, archaeologists have been excavating successive layers of the past, thousands of wooden artifacts, masks, headdresses, scepters, preserved by anaerobic conditions, stone boxes with greenstone beads, shells, coral, figurines over 1,000 years old when the Aztecs placed them here. Children sacrificed to Tlaloc, bearing signs of illness and infection. the crying of victims was desired for rain rituals. In recent years, an offering of 164 starfish and a jaguar skeleton with a spear in its paw was discovered. A stone box with figurines and greenstone beads. A few years ago, the Tzompantli was uncovered, the same skull rack the chronicler described 500 years earlier. Over 600 skulls recovered to date, not just warriors, not just adult men, women, children, people who, according to our understanding of Aztec religion, should not be there. On some sacrificial knives, traces of blood were found. Iron, albumin, hemoglobin. Confirmation after 5 centuries. Perhaps our knowledge is incomplete. Perhaps the Spanish described only what they wanted to see. Perhaps the truth is more complicated than any codex or chronicle can convey. One thing remains certain. In Aztec eyes, this was not barbarism. It was logic. It was duty. It was love in the most extreme form humanity ever devised. We call it cruelty. For them, it was the supreme act of devotion to the gods who sacrificed themselves so the world could exist. The sun still rises every morning. No one asks anymore what price must be paid. If this episode captivated you, leave a like. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.